Jerome, and can I just reiterate a warm welcome to everybody, and thanks to all our speakers, and in particular Millie, who's stepping in at very short notice. And unfortunately, Henry Smith isn't able to join us, but I know Henry will be able to participate at a future event. As Jerome says, we're really keen to dig a little bit deeper into understanding the housing choices, the preferences of people in later life. And today we're doing so through the lens of both right sizing, downsizing, and also right placing. And we are really lucky to have a group of excellent speakers to share some of the findings of work that's been done in different localities, in particular in the Greater Manchester area and in Hackney, as Jerome highlighted. Two different approaches, but really equally important in terms of understanding what the motivations are, what the local conditions are, and the circumstances which are sort of triggering decisions. One of the things I know from the fact is that they've both been engaging very closely with local residents. But I'm not going to sort of spoil their sessions and their presentations. But what we've got here is this afternoon's agenda. We're going to kick off with Dr. Mark Hammond, who's a senior lecturer at the Manchester School of Architecture and has been instrumental in leading this work, but also author of both some HousingLIN blogs as well as other reports. And he and I also sit on the Greater Manchester Combined Authority Housing, Healthy Ageing and Planning group. We're then going to be joined by Millie, who's an evidence manager for homes at the Centre for Ageing Better, reflecting on the work, but also I hope we'll be able to share some of the vision about where Ageing Better are going. They've been really central to positioning issues around housing in the built environment, and issues both in terms of quality, but also thinking about those choices as well. So Millie, looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And by no means least, a fascinating project, not least because I used to live in Hackney, rehousing programme for older social housing tenants, and looking at some of the work that the National Institute for Health Research Public Health team have funded through University of Cambridge, I believe Sheffield as well. And we're joined by Dr. Callum Mattox, a research associate there, on a really fascinating piece of work. This is, I think, really timely. Last week was the ARCO annual conference, and issues around the state of the housing market and what are the drivers for change came up on a number of sessions, for those of you who are able to either go or to listen in. What I was also struck was a piece of work that was coming out of the Oxford University Syed School of Business, which was saying that we need to really ramp up the supply, and an ambition by ARCO to think about 1 million new homes for older adults by 2040. We're currently building about 5,000 to 7,000, if that. So we're way short. But part of this is about creating those conditions for people to think about what their options are in terms of resizing, downsizing, indeed upsizing, and creating the right places to be more age friendly. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Mark, who's really going to give you an overview of some of the exciting work that's been taking place across Greater Manchester. So Mark, thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Let me just get my slides open. Can everyone see this? Wonderful. Okay. So you'll notice I am not Professor Stephen White. He sends his apologies. He's come down ill today, but hopefully I will be able to do the slides he normally presents justice. So today, really, we're sharing some initial findings and recommendations from a piece of research we've been doing for the last few years now, called Rightplace. There is a report on the right-hand side of the page here, which doesn't yet exist. We're going through a process of really workshopping kind of what the findings mean and how they can have the most impact. And hopefully some of you may want to contribute to helping our understanding of that in the Q&A later. So I'll start with a bit of broad context, really. This won't be surprising to kind of many of you in the room who've got an interest in aging, but we know that our older population is going through a really significant shift, not just in terms of a growing population, but more diverse, more unequal, and with really kind of different expectations from generations that have come before. You know, an example of this is about about inequality in later life, we can see between the richest and poorest areas, there's a huge difference in life expectancy, but also healthy life expectancy. Really stark numbers about the amount of years people can expect to be in good health in later life. From our perspective, you know, one of the backgrounds to our research is what we see as a kind of latent kind of ageism, not just within architecture, but within a lot of professions, which might not be in a sense consciously trying to talk down older people or marginalize them, but it's a real blind spot, we think, for a lot of professions, which we certainly think is worth consideration. And this kind of justice lens really underpins a lot of the research that we've been doing. When I say we, I should talk about this thing we've got going on in Greater Manchester. So for those of you who don't know, Greater Manchester's had a really long history of developing ageing work, both within the research community and public policy community. You know, Jeremy alluded to the Housing Planning and Ageing group within the GM Ageing Hub, which has got a long history of working with various partners. And we're in the process, and have been for a while, of setting up we're calling the Design for Life Agency, a way of bringing together the stakeholders that are currently working on this agenda, and looking at how we can you know, work with communities and develop community action, but also at a strategic and policy level. So that's the kind of the broad ecosystem that we're operating with. So what is our response to all of this? We know that ageing is really high on the agenda. Certainly our work with GMCA is, excuse me, you know, highlighting a real need for us to look again at how we're thinking about ageing and housing, recognizing the good work that has gone on, not least by people like Jeremy over the last decade or so. So we've all come together to produce a document called A Design for Life, Urban Practices for an Age-Friendly City. It's a free book, you can go and download it. It's designed for architects, developers, and people with an interest in kind of urban design. And really it sums up the position we've developed over the last few years, which is focusing on a kind of humanistic understanding of later life that moves beyond this idea of kind of older people as a medical deficit, or even as customers, but older people as citizens. We're kind of trying to rehabilitate the word life, that we think in a lot of circumstances is used to describe a period between birth and death. And we want to talk about life as social life, cultural life, community life, and all the things that make life worth living, which sometimes we feel gets lost when we're talking about older people, when kind of medical lenses alone are applied to the way we think about it. So an example of how we've been working in Greater Manchester. So when I first started working with the GM Ageing Hub, one of the first conversations we had with people was, we keep on seeing this term downsizing in all these policy documents, and we're not sure it's right. It feels a bit strange. Can we do some work to look into it? So, you know, downsizing as a rhetoric we think is pretty problematic. It assumes that people are moving just to smaller properties. It perpetuates this ageist narratives about older people under occupying family homes. When people talk about encouraging people to downsize, that was a position that was often taken with a lot of stick and not a lot of carrot, is I think how we talk about it. Older people are put as the people to blame for this, but there is no initiative necessarily in place to support them kind of positively in this. And these positions rarely acknowledge things like taste, aspiration, and desire, which are kind of so important to the kind of process of option recognition that people have and the embeddedness people have in communities. It's worth saying, I saw that Sheila Peace from Open University's in the crowd today. It's a crowd. And she's a real influence on the kind of work that's gone on in this area about kind of option recognition and how people make these assessments about the optimal environments in later life, which are really human and sometimes irrational in some ways from an outside perspective, but they're really human and meaningful. So we kind of transitioned to this term right sizing instead. It sounds older people's choices to move are really complicated because older people are really complicated. Recognized as this diversity of reasons, some of them planned and some of them unplanned. And it shifts the focus on developers, designers, and policymakers being agents of change, rather than putting all the burden on older people to, you know, you should downsize and we won't tell you how or how we're going to support it. So a little bit of data from this project. you know, we took apart all of these kind of the very simple narrative people use around downsizing, which assumes big Victorian semi-detached house into, you know, 2-bedroom extra care. You know, it's not really backed up by the data in a bunch of different ways. We're seeing a really complicated set of moves between different housing typologies. We're seeing as many people moving to the same size and larger houses than we're seeing people moving to smaller houses. And that's only something that really changes at the very end of life. This was a really fascinating one for me. It was about, it's part of a longitudinal study done by, as part of Understanding Society. So we looked before and after people moved at whether they thought they were going to move in the next year. And only half of people said they expected to move. Only half of people said they wanted to move. So that's a huge number of people who are making unplanned moves. And of course, you know, we talk about health changes as a driver for this and the idea of someone having a fall precipitating a move. But we're also seeing issues like divorce or employment changes or financial reasons for moving in later life, which are ideas that we think are really underrepresented in the narratives we have around, we see around downsizing in public policy, and something that should be part of the discussion we're having about right sizing. So we tried to theorize this idea of a right sizing gap, recognizing that older people are the least likely age group to move, but there was a huge unmet demand in various studies as well. We also recognize that we can't build our way out of this problem. This isn't something we can solve by building 4 million new homes for older people. We know that 90% of the homes that older people are going to live in already exist, and the majority lack things like, you know, basic accessibility standards. So our idea of this right sizing gap is that better options are neither available nor accessible, by which we mean not in the right tenure, the right cost, the right type, right standard, but critically in the right place. We were seeing place attachment and kind of local identity as this huge determinant of people's propensity to move, which again is something we thought was underrepresented in the discourse we were seeing around kind of housing options for older people. Part of this is recognizing that you can close the right sizing gap by building houses, but you can also close that gap by ensuring that neighborhoods and homes people currently live in are suitable for people to age in place in as well. So I'm going to transition on to the Right Place project now, which kind of led on pretty directly from the right sizing work. But we were just really interested in this idea of place and what that meant in relation to these kind of big data analysis and what kind of tools we can develop for employing them at a local level. So what we found was that, like I say, the neighborhood is the clearest indicator of people's desire to move or stay. That there were 5 distinct groups amongst older people with very different characteristics and contexts. And for us, this was really important because we were seeing older people described in very simplistic terms in a lot of documents. And we think any effort to try and get people to understand more about the complexity and diversity in later life, the richer our policy environment will be for it. So things we created as part of this project is a tool for predicting which kind of group, which of these 5 groups older people are part of, but also a series of methods to understand kind of place-specific initiatives that can take place. So when we talk about a toolkit, we don't mean a linear path from where we are now to a desired endpoint. We really mean a toolkit in the sense of methods in which people can solve problems. Because we know that at each local authority and at least each housing association, the problems and constraints and opportunities might be really different, and a one-size-fits-all solution probably isn't appropriate for the world we're in. So there are 3 real dimensions to this idea of policy, place, and people. And connecting these together, we think is the real opportunity there. We see good work going on in each of these sections individually, but how they can coalesce is a really exciting part of this. Okay, so we used a mixed methods approach. We looked at big data and latent class analysis. We did a survey, but then we also looked at really kind of architecturally specific pieces of work. We looked at things like the housing design in a neighborhood, some of the urban design features of a community, spatial data, so the census and how's that played out at a really local level, as well as stakeholder engagements and workshops with older people. We think to understand policy people in place, you kind of need a combination of all 3 in some sense. So I'll start with the policy side, which was our kind of big data analysis. We use something called a latent class analysis, which is too complicated to describe in 2 minutes. So I will leave that for any questions people have afterwards. But basically, we use some clever statistics to break down older people as part of this large data set into 5 latent classes, which have very different experiences of place. Now, it's not as simple as saying group 1 wants to move and group 5 wants to stay in their current home. Within each group, there is diversity, but there's also, they're brought together by their commonalities. And their commonalities are primarily around attitudes. So although we can describe them in relation to socio-economic characteristics, it's their attitudes to place and their feelings of embeddedness which really define these 4 groups. So the 5 groups are, they're here. That we've got a group at the top who, have a poor level of satisfaction with their home and neighbourhoods, and they also have very few personal resources in order to change that, being something really critical. So there is a lot of social tenants here, but also a lot of people in the private rented sector as well, including some owner occupiers, usually those with low equity. Whereas group 2 has in some ways similar socio-economic characteristics, but are much more satisfied and embedded in their communities. They are people that, despite challenging circumstances, have built a really strong set of social connections, relationships with the community, which provide them with resilience that perhaps isn't there for group 1. Group number 3 is a really interesting one in that they are quite dissatisfied, and it seems to be a relationship between protecting their current status and kind of mitigating future risks being the kind of dynamics in play in terms of their housing decisions. Groups 3 and 4 are the least likely to move. They are really embedded in their communities. They have slightly different characteristics in terms of group 4 being slightly more urban, group 5 being usually slightly more rural, and being slightly different ages as well. But both of these groups are groups that are interested in maintaining an already high quality of life, within their community. We've produced a big dashboard about the kind of, the situation with each of these. And the side on the right, I'm going to talk about in a second, which is us testing it out in a case study in Reddish. I'm not going to go through the details of each of these 5 groups, but they will be in the document when it is released. So, these 5 latent classes, why do they exist? We think they're really useful in terms of becoming more specific about the kinds of policy responses that we direct. So we were seeing, at a local authority level, the kinds of housing policies and strategies we're seeing were obviously focused on extra care and maybe some help for home repairs. But when we start thinking about it in terms of these 5 latent classes, you can identify more nuance. So you can develop neighborhood scale housing strategies, which are perhaps more meaningful and more tailored to the opportunities and constraints of a local population. So how do we connect this policy and people? Well, it's quite easy, really. There's a survey that you can deliver. So by constructing this large data set and these latent classes, we also developed a survey which would allow us to do a 13-question survey and identify with quite a high level of accuracy which of the 5 latent classes are in. So we're currently working with a local authority to embed this into part of their normal tenant survey in order to create a kind of understanding, a kind of large population scale of who are the people who are going to benefit from their housing strategies and where are they geographically within their local authority. And this being a first step in the way of making a more specific and more local kind of set of housing policies. We've tested it in Reddish and in a follow-up in Old Moat that I'll talk about in a second, which kind of confirms what we have hypothesized from where it's derived, which was this massive data set of 16,000 people. So another connection, the connection between people and place. So within the Right Place project, we focused in on an area called Reddish as a case study site. We're really interested in developing tools through which we can make this connection between people who live there and the environments they live in and what they think their options are and what they think their options could be. What kind of support do they see available? So we developed a project which is shamelessly stolen from the Kirsty and Phil program, Love It or List It, in which we basically take the program and make it into a research methodology. We did a study of local housing stock, because we know in most areas there are actually only 5 or 6 different house types that are spread across a geography. So in Reddish, that was the case. We just went and analysed those 5 houses so that when people arrived at the workshop, we kind of already had a drawing of their home and we could talk about it with them. So we talked about their house, we talked about what they liked and didn't like. And then we showed them options in the area. We showed them what was currently on the housing market, had a discussion about that. Then we had a discussion about different typologies that perhaps weren't available in the area, but could feasibly. So we talked about older people's co-housing. We talked about the opportunity for people to move from suburban areas into more of the city centre and how people feel about those kinds of decisions. So we're building up a richness, but we're also building up a richness in relation to a very specific place. So in Reddish, we were finding amongst a lot of people we spoke to a really strong kind of community embeddedness, which meant that any option that needed to exist would have to exist within a 1/4 mile radius of where they currently live, or else, you know, it's completely off the cards in terms of their desirability. So because we're collecting, you know, we're understanding these things in relation to the people, and we've got this large data set behind it, and we've got all the urban design analysis we'll be doing, we can start looking at this kind of information at a sub-locality level. So this is an example of kind of group 5. There was a cluster in Reddish of group 5 residents. They live in a very particular house type. Most of them have had a really similar extension done to the back of that house because it was the house that lends itself to that kind of extension. So they've got all this space, they've got a lot of ground floor space, so people felt comfortable making alterations to their property in later life. They really didn't see a need to move or anything in the area which would, you know, excite them to move. So this is a group who were incentivized by more support in later life and things like kind of initiatives in the 4th age, perhaps, that would enable them to retain their place in the community, was being really important things in kind of addressing the Right Sizing Act for them. How am I doing for time? I think I've probably got a little bit longer. Okay, I've got a few more slides. So here's a couple of examples. This is a resident who did the survey and was in group 1. This was a tenant who is a social tenant who lived in a property which, from a lot of standpoints, meets all of the needs we need. So if we're talking about physical inclusion or physical accessibility, this is someone who's got this sorted out. They lived in a single-story home. It was right next to a bunch of the shops and the facilities. You know, all of that's been considered as, you know, cheap to run, all of that. And they were incredibly unhappy and didn't want to live there. It's because of their connection with their community. Because of various things that happened in their life and their own mobility, they felt unable to connect with the people in the wider community, even though they had good access to these amenities. So what this really highlighted was the kind of, again, simplistic notions of inclusion, social inclusion, just being the ability for someone to get from their home to the shops or from their home to a community venue only goes so far. This is someone who would really benefit from a targeted age-friendly neighbourhoods programme in their area, or for their housing association, perhaps to engage in kind of social inclusion in a slightly different way. So, or perhaps the issue of accessibility and level access is fine, but it needs to be in a community setting, like perhaps a, you know, specialist housing model that would enable them to interact with their peers in a slightly different way than they currently can. On the other side, this is a group where I've kind of just talked about. Person in group 5 living in this you know, semi-detached house, feeling, you know, they're financially comfortable, you know, they've got this great sense of local pride in their community, they've done adaptations already, they've got all of these great links. So in a way, you know, housing strategy for this group, kind of got to think about what it actually means. You know, certainly this is someone who doesn't want to have to move into specialist housing, certainly doesn't want to move away from their neighbourhood. So again, what kind of alternative provision is available to people like this within a local housing strategy? So this was kind of a worked example in Reddish, which I think demonstrates, we worked with Stockport Council, had a few meetings with them. We tried to build off the existing intelligence we've developed as part of a previous study with them, looking at local data, as well as an interest from the local authority in having a big conversation with people in midlife about their housing options. And we think this demonstrates a way of bringing some of these tools together to look at policy people in place in order to identify perhaps some of the gaps in how we're addressing the kind of housing options for this group. But I want to share another example which really surprised us. It's in Old Moat, which some of you may know has been a site of a lot of age-friendly work over about 10 years. So this was, we ran a workshop as part of a different research project looking at socially rented older people's co-housing. We know that Old Moat's got a high number of social tenants, and in terms of their health and kind of economic data, you would think they're part of group 1 and group 2, people that are either embedded in a community but have very limited means, or are very dissatisfied with their community. But actually what we found was that a lot of the workshop participants were in group 5. They were the most embedded, the most kind of comfortable in their community, the least reluctant, the least propensive to kind of changing their residential environments. And this it took us aback a little bit. But then we thought about it a bit more, and actually makes complete sense. So group 5, there are a very small number of social tenants. So we assume that these social tenants are the most embedded in their community social tenants you can imagine. So it makes sense that people who've lived in a community that have had a 10-year investment into age-friendly neighborhoods, that have a kind of social infrastructure like an age-friendly community cafe right on their doorstep, that have a really dedicated set of service provisions and an age-friendly officer who works full-time in the area. It's not a surprise that people in this area have such a high level of embeddedness and don't feel the need to have different housing options, because they feel the options available to them are already brilliant. They can't imagine a better environment for themselves. So I think this lends back to, I appreciate a lot of what I spoke about today is not about building housing. It's about improvements to neighborhoods and service provision, which remove the need for some of that latent demand in housing. But we think it's something really important that's worth kind of raising, because it's something that frankly we don't see a lot of in housing strategies. We see a real focus on what's going to get built, and there's a much wider debate about the communities and neighborhoods we live in, which I think is really important for us to be having. So how can all this be integrated? Certainly, we've got examples of the survey being built into existing local authority or housing association surveys. The desktop approach of urban design analysis and spatial data could be built into business intelligence workflows. Housing analysis, we think, is something really important that should be part of stock condition surveys, because it gives us a real insight into the kinds of alterations people can and can't make to their existing home. The urban design and neighborhood analysis could inform all kinds of kind of age-friendly approaches. We think that's a really important baseline for any age-friendly neighborhood initiative, is a good baseline understanding of the community and how it operates. And all of the participatory resident engagement, which we didn't really focus on too much today, but the love it and list exercises are really important in making it not just a data-driven approach, because we know that they can, regardless of how sophisticated those data sources can be, don't give an insight into communities that residents really have and hold in themselves. So next steps, like I say, the document hasn't been published yet. We're going through a process of sharing and testing. We had a great meeting with housing association representatives in Greater Manchester yesterday, which has given us real insight into how they want this kind of information to be used. We're really interested in identifying kind of partners to pilot this with as well. So if anyone is interested in this and wants to work with us, do let us know. And for those who don't know, in Greater Manchester, there is this new GM Aging in Place Pathfinder programme in which all of the 10 Greater Manchester neighbourhoods are developing these local aging in place plans, which includes issues of kind of housing and neighbourhood. And we're part of that team, and we're really keen for this to be kind of rolled out across that. So we've got some really tangible examples of how this kind of evidence can be used in localities. Right, so I have not got a thank you slide, but Thank you, everyone. I hope I kept it to time, and would really love to hear any feedbacks or questions later on in the session. Thanks.
Mark, thanks ever so. That was really helpful, and I was struck by sort of what your approach as well. And you know, having been part of the Dwell project in Sheffield and yours as well, I was this morning in Wales, and you know, there's something called the Placemaking Charter. Now, you know, I'm just thinking there may be a way of weaving some of your work into that as well. So I don't know whether you've had contacts with the Welsh Government at all and looking at design quality there, but there's certainly a lot of relevance here.
Well, I'll have a chat with you about charters later, but that might be on the agenda for tomorrow's GM meeting.
Yeah, so Mark and I are meeting up in another guise tomorrow. So, well, look, thanks very much. Mark, there's several questions. Well, there are quite a few questions. Please don't answer them in the chat box or in the question. We'll come back to those later on. But thanks ever so much, and a lot of very positive comments. So, Millie, as I said earlier, thanks very much for stepping in. I know you've been working so closely behind the scenes, so you know a lot of this at first hand, but over to you. You're just muted.
There we go. Cool. Can everybody see my screen? Yes. So, is that the right screen, everybody? Jeremy?
Yeah, it's all good. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity today to be at the HAPPI session. I work with Mark on the Rightplacing project, but today I'm going to start a bit broader about Aging Better's new ambition for housing, because I'm sure a lot of you are aware who we are, well, hopefully, but actually the best thing is to come here today to tell you actually how, as an organisation, we're now even putting more focus into our homes programme. So I'm going to talk you through that, and then I'll just briefly talk about how we think Right Place will help us achieve those ambitions. So for those who don't know, and I hope you do, otherwise we're not doing our job correctly, so we're the Centre for Aging Better. It's a charitable foundation funded by the National Lottery Community Fund, and we're part of the What's Work network. As I said, we've recently gone for a strategy refresh, and rather than having kind of a wider understanding of how to age well, we're focusing on the following things, as we think that's actually how Aging Better can best contribute to everyone living a better life. So first of all, building an age-friendly movement and campaigning to end ageism. Most importantly to talk here today, age-friendly homes, making homes in England safe and accessible, and then finally age-friendly employment, to ensuring people can work for as long as they want to and are able to. So in terms of our homes programme, we overall want to ensure that everyone can live in age-friendly and accessible, healthy homes in intergenerational communities. Obviously, this is a big ask. So basically, our programme is now kind of breaking this down as to how we think we can achieve that, which I'll go into in a minute. So when we were thinking about, you know, what's most important for homes programme moving forward, this is what we were really thinking about in terms of what are the biggest issues facing older people in terms of homes. So as I'm sure everyone here is aware, poor housing can cause or worsen health conditions. And at the moment in England, around 10 million people live in a home that endangers their health, well-being and financial security, with this largely affecting older people. In terms of new homes, only 9% are currently being built to accessibility standards. And I think kind of what Mark spoke to today is the risk is not equally shared. So those on older people, those of lower income, and those living in certain areas with high levels of poor quality housing. And a lot of the people we're trying to work to support are Aging Better, are unfortunately those who are faced with the trifecta. And again, as I'm sure none of us can get away from at the moment, the rising cost of living, with 6.5 million households unable to live in a warm and safe home now. So bringing this together, these kind of asks were developed through our Good Home inquiry. And for those who aren't aware of that, I'd really encourage you to go on the website. I'm happy to send around some information around that, to look at basically how we develop these asks. So our asks are that national leadership through a cross-government housing strategy with a ministerial champion to implement it, a local delivery through a Good Home agency, which I can talk to another time, a combination of government and private investment to develop products to encourage and incentivise homeowners and landlords to improve their homes, and inclusion of housing as a key part of preventative health strategies. So over the last year, as I said, we had the Good Home Inquiry and we had a strategy refresh, and we kind of mapped out the problems that we think aging better can really make a difference, and therefore what our response is going to be. And over the coming few months, Aging Better will develop this more publicly and hopefully engage with a lot of you that are here today. So the problems are lacking understanding of what makes a good home and the health impacts. And through that, we are intending to run a consumer awareness campaign. Obviously, at the heart of the work we do at Aging Better is supporting those who don't have the agency or autonomy to do that themselves and need support. However, in addressing poor quality homes, it's important that we actually try and have a preventive angle of those who can work towards living in a better quality home independently. The other problem is a lack of local coordinated support services. And so this is one of the main things that we're actually focusing on at Aging Better at the moment, and it's the Good Home Agency. And the intention of this is a holistic local approach where you bring together information and advice. You bring to support people to make the changes, and you support them financially. So it's thinking about understanding how our homes affect us all the way to someone living in a home which has lack of hazards. And kind of closely linked to that is a lack of financial products to enable those with some income or wealth. And we want to explore whether we can influence the creation of new financial products. And at the moment, we're actually working with central government and leaders from the private sector as to how we can address that in partnership, as what we found from the Good Home Inquiry is, unfortunately, without buy-in from all parties, a lot of innovative ideas tend to fail. So most relevant to what we're here today is the lack of community design in town planning to suit local needs specifically. And we hope to work with the Rightplace team to address this. And this includes the development of tools to support community dialogue, as Mark spoke to, but also really importantly, I think a big part of this is local planners and local authorities understanding the need, which Mark has outlined a very hopefully new way to do so, an almost simplified way to do so. And then finally, we want to increase the supply of new homes that are not fit for current or future needs. And we'll be doing that through the Home Coalition campaign, and hopefully, fingers crossed, hearing about the M42 accessibility standard in the near future. So from this, within our strategy, as I said, one of the key 4 focuses is creating age-friendly places. A lot of the work Aging Better's focuses on previously has been on the physical dimensions of the home, but actually through the Rightplace work, we have now come to see that the place someone lives is also a key determinant in whether people live healthy and happy later lives, and that therefore must be central to what we try to push for to age-friendly housing. So therefore, Aging Better have made in their strategy that we will work with planners and councillors to ensure new developments respond to the needs of local people in that area. And as I said, that local plans are designed to create age-friendly places. So that's kind of the bigger picture at the moment at Aging Better. But you know what I'm here to talk to you briefly today is how do we think we can use Rightplace to answer all of the figures I've just outlined for you. So Aging Better's response from the Rightplace work, I've kind of highlighted 3 high-level things, I think, how it fits with our work. So, of course, centrally, the importance of place, then the need to involve older people in local planning, and I kind of like this phrase of we need to stop assuming and start listening. Stop telling older people what they want in a home and really start listening about what they need, but also what they desire. You know, everyone deserves to live in a home that not only fulfills their needs, but also they're happy there and, you know, they thrive there. I think it's important that while not necessarily part of Aging Better about supporting those most in need, but the Rightplace really speaks to the need to encourage the narrative of older people as active consumers. That kind of is reflected in the 5 groups that Mark spoke to. And then finally, just provide an alternative approach to planning. I know planning so far can be almost very dated in some local authorities. And I think it's our duty and part of the right place to show them how you can do it differently. So what do we intend to do with this? And Mark did outline a few things, but specifically what Ageing Better is intending to do at this point is influence local authority strategies to managing their housing stock using the approach to gathering evidence outlined through Rightplace, explore opportunities of developing the toolkit with potential for future piloting, and also actually incorporate the Rightplace work into our other programmes, which are campaigning through the Home Coalition. And I think what we want to make sure with the new strategy at Ageing Better is that we bring everything together. We shouldn't have to be choosing between people living in accessible homes and living it in the place they need. We need to make sure that it's a holistic approach to older people's housing. And then finally, hopefully continue to work with GMCA and the Managed School Architecture on our shared ambitions of creating age-friendly places. So that's me done. Hopefully that's kind of showed you the direction that Ageing Better is going at this time and how the focus and working with Rightplace, we can hopefully achieve that. Thank you.
Thanks, Millie, and apologies if you noticed I dropped off for about 2 minutes during your presentation, but I had a big internet crash. In fact, I think Teams was trying to take over Zoom, which often is a problem, but you raised a number of really important points. I heard about the Good Homes Inquiry, but also some of the findings and how you want to implement that. And I know we've got planners, Ian and others on the group crowd who have really worked closely on that planning agenda. And again, I don't know whether you joined us last week for our happy hour last week, but we had a speaker from the Department of Health who was very impressed about trying to make sure that when we take that leadership, what role can the Department of Health and working with government departments take the lessons learned from Greater Manchester and try and build that into the forthcoming sort of work around new models of care and innovation funding that they hope to make some announcement later this year. Copies of his slides and the recordings are available on the LIN website. But without further ado, Callum, I'm sure you're going to pick up a number of points that have been raised already, but a really exciting project in Hackney. So over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I'm going to talk to you today about a project that we did in collaboration with the London Borough of Hackney. So that's myself and colleagues at University of Cambridge and also the University of Sheffield. So what we did, what Hackney asked us to do was to have a look at some of the rehousing programs for social housing tenants, specifically for older social housing tenants, and just have a look at what their experiences were like and if there was anything that could be done to improve these. So just a bit of background, there were 4 rehousing programs that they asked us to look at. 2 were run directly by Hackney Council. So there was one called downsizing, and it's still being called downsizing, I believe. We haven't, or they haven't changed it to right sizing yet, so maybe they should. Regeneration, which was a very big one. As you can imagine, regeneration involves, generally speaking, demolishing entire neighbourhoods sometimes and rebuilding them anew. So that involves a lot more people. There were a couple of rehousing programs that were London-wide. So one was called Housing Moves, which allowed people to move to other properties across London. And finally, there's one called Seaside and Country Homes, which allowed people to move out of London altogether and aim to move them into coastal and rural areas. So basically what we did is we looked at all these programs and looked at the experiences of the people that had moved through these. So specifically, what did the council want to know? Well, how can these rehousing programs, for older social housing tenants be optimised, and how can desirable outcomes be maximised? So the way that we did this, we looked at a few different, it was a mixed methods study, so we looked at a few different things. There was a literature review, there's analysis of documents. We did a postal survey with older social housing tenants across each of the schemes. The one I'm going to talk most today about is the Photovoice part of it. So in Photovoice, what you do is you ask participants to take photographs that are significant or relevant to some aspect of their lives, and in this case it's moving house through one of these schemes, and then they select some, usually 2 to 4 of these, and you have an interview with them about it. You ask them about why they took these photographs and what it means to them, how it fits into their perception of their move and things like that. We also did a couple of focus groups with older movers and non-movers, and some interviews with policy and practice-based stakeholders. So just to look at, first of all, some of the motivations for moving. Why did people move? And this is looking at each of the rehousing programs. So for downsizing, people were concerned about the manageability of their house and the suitability of it as they grew older. Some people were concerned about their bills. So if they were perhaps a single person living in a larger house, they were worried that, you know, would they be able to afford their bills in the future. There was also a feeling that, you know, and whether rightly or wrongly, maybe I'm in too big a house, maybe I should make this house available to a family who need it and move into a smaller one. And I guess that goes back to some of what Mark was saying about how you view older people and how you treat them, and whether it's appropriate to actually think like that. But in effect, a lot of people were thinking like that for themselves. But then again, you don't know to what extent they felt pressured into that due to, you know, the expectations of society. A lot of people in the seaside and country homes scheme were quite dissatisfied with Hackney, London in general. They spoke a lot about overcrowding, about pollution, about it not feeling like the right place for them anymore. Like things had changed around them, and they didn't really like that. And for a lot of people, it was a good outcome. Some of them just wanted a smaller home, or there were no suitable properties in Hackney. And in some cases, it was to move closer to family who'd already made, some of whom had already made the move or were living there anyway. There's various reasons for housing moves, people wanting to move. Sometimes it was to downsize or even upsize to a bigger home. And for the regeneration lot, this is a non-elective move, so they basically don't have a choice. Their houses generally get demolished and new ones built. And there's often some resistance to that, and I'll get onto that a bit later. And again, it goes back to community. A lot of it's about community. Some people were very dissatisfied with the houses because they had some, mostly flats actually, they had some serious problems, but they actually liked the community they were living in. So that creates a bit of tension. And part of the reason for doing this is what, you know, this project was, what can you do about that? So just thinking about some obstacles to moving. So this looks a little bit complicated, but it's basically just a Venn diagram. So if you look at this blue rectangle outlined here, so and this is the regeneration people. So contained within this are some of the things that make them maybe not want to move. This rectangle here in purple is for the downsizers. This one's for the housing move people in pink, and finally in green there, that's the seaside and country people. So you can see there's some overlap. For the regeneration people, a lot of them wanted to stay close to their neighbours, their families, support networks. So this was really all about community. They were worried that, you know, if they moved away, they might get a better flat, and pretty much they always did. But what would happen to the whole community? What would happen to the friends that they lived there for a long time around? Would they end up being isolated and lonely? Sometimes they were worried about the new houses being more expensive to rent, or they were attached to a family home, so the home that they'd lived in for a long time, despite the fact that it might have some issues. There was a bit of emotional attachment to that. Some were worried about a change of landlord, or some just didn't think they had enough reasons to move. And across, I think, quite a lot of the housing programs, there was just a general feeling that this was a big change in their lives, and they just sometimes felt a bit daunted and overwhelmed about this. And that goes back to something I'll talk about a bit later, is around about communication with the tenants from either the council or the housing associations. So if you have a look at some of the town and, sorry, I keep calling it the town and country, it's seaside and country. A lot of the time, if they were not on a priority list, they could face quite a long wait in waiting for something to become available. There was sometimes high expectations about what sort of housing they would get, and again, that kind of, it went across a few of these the housing programs. People had built up in their minds sometimes quite high expectations of what would become available, that may not have been realistic in a world where there's a real shortage of housing. And again, that's about managing expectations and I think communication with the tenants. And for the downsizing people, so sometimes there was nothing suitable. They'd like to stay in the same area, but just move to somewhere which they felt was a bit more appropriate to them. But again, due to issues around housing stock, sometimes they'd have a long wait, or they'd end up moving into somewhere that really they'd rather not have done. And again, it's about managing expectations, what's available to them, what sort of housing they can expect to move into. So then we looked at the process of moving. So what was it actually like for the people who moved? And again, I'm going to talk a bit about information and communication. So there were mixed experiences. Some people felt that they just didn't have enough information, or things weren't communicated to them clearly enough or in time for their move. And this, a lot of this data comes from the survey. So one of the things that was highlighted among regeneration people were the fact that it wasn't always communicated to them, or they hadn't picked up on the fact that their bills might be different. Not necessarily higher, but there's one example here. So if you look at this one at the bottom, so one tenant was confused about her bills and the fact that she suddenly found that she had to pay for water, not realizing that she'd been paying that all along, and in fact they just calculated the bill a bit differently. I can't remember if in this case it was actually different, or I think it was different but very similar, but she was just a bit worried that, why am I now paying for water? No one told me about this. Again, it just comes down to communication. And some of the practical aspects of moving, there was, particularly in regeneration, there was quite a lot of assistance given. There was financial incentives. There was a lot of arranging of moving the furniture, getting moving vans for them and things like that. That didn't always happen. But when it did, it was definitely highly appreciated. I think it just takes the pressure off a lot of this, as I mentioned, so often overwhelming change that people find themselves in the midst of. And it's often something that creeps up on people as well. I think that was something that came across. And again, I suppose that's down to a bit of possible lack of communication. Things kind of go on, and then suddenly it's a week before they move, and they realise they're going to have to go through this huge change in life, and it becomes quite overwhelming for some older people. One thing that was really appreciated by tenants and understood by the council was this idea of personalised support. So with a lot of these decant officers, the people that organise and arrange the moves, they themselves set quite a lot in store by actually developing the personal relationships. So they got to know the people quite well. They'd go and visit them. They'd go and have a cup of tea. They'd sit and chat to them about what to expect and what sort of help they could get. And where that did happen, it was really appreciated. Unfortunately, it wasn't the same across the board. I think it came out more that there was more resources, I think, put into the regeneration programs. perhaps just because that was by far the biggest one of these rehousing programs. So people there felt quite well supported, a bit less so in some of the other ones. And in fact, there was one of the seaside country people who, as far as he was concerned, got next to no support at all. He had to find the place almost by himself. He didn't find out about the programme via the council. It was just through friends and family. And he applied, and it was the landlord at the other end that found him the place. So, you know, some people felt quite well supported, some people a lot less so. So I'm just going to go and have a look at some examples. So this is a female who downsized. She wanted to downsize, but she didn't really want to move from the area that she was in. She had fairly mixed feelings about the whole thing. She felt that she was being pressured into moving out of a 3-bedroom flat in which she lived on her own. She had some, she's disabled, she had some needs in that direction, and she felt that she wasn't really being listened to. And in fact, she found the process lengthy. There was quite a lot of uncertainty around it. She wasn't happy with the sort of communication that was happening. And she got a flat that she was quite pleased with, but she, to her thinking, it just sort of happened by luck. They hadn't assessed her needs properly, and she ended up in a ground floor flat, a bit smaller than she would have preferred, but she was still reasonably happy with it. She had a garden which she enjoyed. She also, if you can see this photograph here, that thing there is a kiln. So she was a potter. She'd done pottery as a hobby for many years, and was really pleased that she could continue that in her flat. She could she had a garden outside where she could store all her pottery equipment. She was quite pleased with the garden. She went out and bought some plants and boxes from a local organisation that to her mind was that was part of supporting the local community, was buying from this local organisation. So, and I probably should have said, but much of this work took place throughout the pandemic and the lockdown. So a lot of these people were particularly isolated, more so than normal. But she took advantage of the fact that she could spend a bit of time in her garden and get it to her a level of her satisfaction. So this is an interesting one. This lady moved to Kent from London. She found that a lot of her family and friends had moved away, and she just wanted to move closer to them. She felt like she might end up quite isolated if she stayed in London. She found the process very straightforward and quick, reckoning that the fact that she had a 3-bedroom ground floor flat possibly accelerated the move. So for her, it was great. The whole thing happened fairly easily, and she ended up. She didn't end up here. This is neither her nor her garden, but it is our neighbours. So she was delighted with the fact that she could spend a lot of time with friends, with family, and it was, for her, it was just absolutely brilliant. Really, she couldn't speak highly enough about it. And there's her garden, of which she was very proud. So here's an example of someone who moved via Regeneration. They'd lived in Woodbury Down in Hackney for a very long time. Some of the flats were not in great condition, so for him it was a good thing to move to a new flat, but he was worried about the effect that it ultimately had on the community. So, you know, he's saying that they split up a lot of people, it killed the community. There was a very tight community here before that. So you've got this tension between, you know, people living in a community that they enjoy the community aspect of it, but the actual flats that they were living in were not in very good condition, and they talked about, in some cases, damp running down the walls. He also talked a bit about, so these new developments contained a mix of private flats, some of which were very expensive, and the social housing. And he was concerned also about this idea that you'd end up with two communities, the haves and the have-nots, as I think he put it. And one of the things he talked about was a lot of the local shops that were kind of a hub of the local community were now gone, and there was other shops and restaurants in their place that particularly restaurants, you say they were expensive, and he wasn't really interested in doing that. So, you know, there were aspects to the move that were very positive, but at the same time, they did mourn this loss of community. On the plus side there was some space for a bit of local activism. So this is the same guy. So him and a friend of his got together, and they had this multi-use sports area developed, which is what you can see here. And to his mind, it was, you know, they put quite a lot of effort into this, and it took quite a lot to actually get it going. But eventually they did, and to them, again, it's a great asset to the local community. And as he says, Arsenal come down a couple of times a week and do a bit of training with the kids that are playing there. And the other thing that's actually kind of stands out in this area are these wetlands, which I think were old quarries which filled with water, and for many, many years they were fenced off and boarded up, and they couldn't be used. Now they've been opened up as some green space for the local community, and it really is, they're really beautiful, and kind of a surprise to see in such a busy built up part of London. Again, this came about through these two guys pushing and pushing to have these opened up to the public, and eventually they were. And as he says, in the pandemic, it was, you know, it was a great boon. It was, it really stood out. It was somewhere for people to go that may have otherwise just been stuck in their flat, or the alternative is to walk the streets. How am I doing for time?
We're going to wrap up, but I was going to suggest we carry on for about 5 or so minutes over, if you and Mark and Millie can hang on for a little while longer.
Yeah, I can. I've just got two more summing up slides. So our findings suggested a few things. Got I think it's 9 suggestions. So I think there's more that can be done to make information available about these rehousing schemes. As I said, a lot of people just didn't realise they were even happening, except for maybe the regeneration, which is kind of a big obvious change, and it's hard to escape. Incentives were used, and I think these were you know, worked quite well where they were used. But going back to the idea of some personal support, I think the circumstances and preferences of the tenants were not always taken into account, but where they were, it worked really well, and I think it's recognised by the council that this is a good thing, and the tenants really appreciated it. In Woodbury Down, there was some compensation offered that people again really appreciated, and I think it made up to an extent, at least for the fact that they were being asked to move and they didn't really have a choice in the matter. There were some obstacles to rehousing. Again, the personalised support was something that I think it's being addressed, and I think that's a good thing. But I suppose the overarching issue really is lack of suitable properties and low housing stock. That kind of dominated much of what was happening. Looking beyond Hackney, there were people who moved into particularly the seaside and country homes, which seemed to be a real success. That I suppose it's a bit of a self-selecting group, and that the people that wanted to move there were always going to be happier that they actually moved there. But nevertheless, I think it was very successful for these people. Communication, as with many things, is key. I think there are gaps remaining. The housing officers and tenants advisors I think they do their best, but I think they're not always, they don't always have the capacity to do as much as they'd like. Some tenants felt well supported, but it wasn't always the case. And I think, again, going back to the personalised support and just a bit more capacity to deal with tenants would help. Everyone appreciated help with the practical aspects of moving, particularly, I suppose, true for older people for whom the physical effort of moving may be difficult. And finally, on regeneration, as I said before, almost everyone was very happy with the flat they moved into, but the disruptive effect on the community was often felt quite strongly, and we think that more could be done to improve this. And that's it. Thank you. I do have a thank you slide. Just to say very briefly, I'll put in the chat a link to a summary of this work. We've also got a video about the work, which I would appreciate if you could watch. And there's a link to some research findings as well within that link, which I'll put in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Callum. I think Jerome may have just beat you to it.
Right.
I think he's just posted something. Just double check we've got the right link. But thanks very much for that presentation. And I hope everybody in our LIN crowd this afternoon will like the sort of the variety we've been able to present. And apologies if we've overrun slightly in terms of the presentations, but I thought the richness was really important to cover. So we've got a selection of questions, and so I'm going to cluster these. Some of these aimed at Mark, some of these more general. But one of the things coming through, I don't know if any of you have had a chance to have a look at them, is issues around, and I think some of you talked about cultural differences, but equally there's a lot coming through about understanding the sensitivities and understanding the broad issues around diversity of local populations. And again, Abdul, Ravat raises this, Sheila Peace raises this, and others raise this about understanding that multicultural aspect. Any comments from any of you around that?
Yeah, I can jump in terms of the. I think one of them was in relation to the latent class analysis. It was really interesting for us. It wasn't a particularly strong predictor. There's a distinction between, obviously, the people from diverse backgrounds kind of aren't spread evenly across the 5 groups, but being from a minority ethnic group wasn't a good predictor of someone's membership, kind of over and beyond other factors. That's quite hard to explain. I appreciate that. But I think what we're seeing is kind of different groups membership in different characteristics. So, for example, we know that kind of ethnic minority older people are more likely to be in the private rental sector pretty significantly. I think about 13% are in the private rental sector compared to 8% for the general population. Similarly, social housing, I think it's something like 24% amongst older people from ethnic minority backgrounds. So what we're seeing is people are naturally kind of in some of the latent classes, but their ethnicity itself isn't a good predictor of the kind of difference beyond that. However, I think this is where the idea of place becomes really important, because when we're talking about kind of ethnicity, we know that there is a really strong kind of spatial dynamic to that, particularly in urban areas. And when we're talking about kind of housing strategies at a local level, I think this is why it's really important to start having housing strategies at a sub-local authority level as well, because, you know, in Manchester, for example, a housing strategy that works for, you know, Human Moss Side is entirely different from a housing strategy appropriate for Collyhurst, even though in terms of a lot of the demographic factors, they're the same. We know in terms of ethnicity and local identity, they're such different. Again, this is why it's building the policy people in place together is our route for kind of identifying and articulating that. But yeah, certainly in the data itself, it's quite a confusing picture. I have, though, immediately seen that suggestion, emailed my data science person to make sure there's a page in the report about just that. So apologies, I've not got a very good answer for you at the moment. There will be one.
But I think some of this has come through also. I know Abdul was very heavily involved with the LIN's work in Kirklees, which was looking at issues around the South Asian community. And again, looking at those and particularly local areas and defining even into very hyper local as well was something that came through. Callum or Millie, any thoughts around this in terms of diversity, and perhaps also points being made around sort of how to look at another question, which was around the types of financial incentives that are available?
We struggled with diversity in our sample, actually, despite the fact that Hackney is a very diverse borough. We approached a couple of groups to try and help us with this, but in the end, there just weren't as many ethnic minorities answering the questionnaire that we had hoped. It's something I think we do struggle with, and I think it sounds a bit of a wishy-washy response, but I think we just need to try harder, work with some of these groups more, try and get in nearer the start and work with them right from the beginning of starting this type of work. Even when we're developing the research methods and things like that, are there any things we could do any differently that might encourage people from ethnic minorities to respond more? But yeah, I mean, slightly disappointing, and I don't really have a good answer to address it other than do better.
Millie, this may be before you joined Ageing Better. I know that the Centre for Ageing Better and the LIN commissioned the University of Nottingham to do some scoping of work around this several years ago. I don't know whether you were around at that time, but are there other issues that are coming through from both your inquiry and your broader approach around age friendliness?
Yeah, so I think in general, especially within homes, as part of the strategy, we're looking more into the data available, and unsurprisingly, I kind of speak to what Mark and Callum just said, the data is so limited. However, so kind of what we're trying to come from is whether we cannot, the big data sets, we can't influence them to think more about it, we can make sure the lived experience of those people are more in our work. So as part of that, we're actually setting up advisory groups, which will kind of, when we're scoping all our future work, we'll be involved in that to make sure we have those voices, and therefore actually the kind of asks and recommendations that we're pushing through our work accurately reflect them rather than speak on behalf of them. So again, I think as Callum and Mark said, it's a future thing. It's something we're all really concerned about at the moment, but we're kind of actively looking at how we can address that in the coming months.
Well, we look forward to learning more about that, but also I'm sure we'll be covering some of the work that Sheila Peace and the Open University are going to be doing across Hackney, Tower Hamlets and Newham with the Bangladeshi community, the Proban community, those people in later life there, very much part of involving and co-producing right at the outset the advisory groups, and which I know is we're doing right at this moment. There are a couple of really interesting questions, which are maybe very straightforward, but we have an anonymous question. But what about thinking about downsizing? Is there enough good social housing for everyone's needs? So it's an obvious question. So just sort of those sort of things, and also a follow up. Mark, did you only speak to social housing tenants? How about the PRS or owner occupiers?
Yeah. So on the second one first, we in the field work we spoke to owner occupiers and social tenants. We didn't actually speak to any people in the PRS sector, but our latent class analysis it's a kind of a big data set which includes a kind of representative sample of everyone. In terms of have we got the right and enough housing for older people? So this is the tension. Fundamentally, no, I don't think. I think we can all agree that kind of we need more, but there is there's huge kind of structural and systemic challenges towards achieving that as well. So I think it's, on one side it's conflicting for me, because part of me is saying, let's invest in communities, let's support what's there. But fundamentally at some level, I'm sure we all sign up to a kind of a huge drive of construction as well. It's just, realistically, it's really hard to kind of bring those together.
There are a couple of other questions, and in fact, there's also one from in the chat box around, should we be looking at things like the seaside and country homes? I don't know if you've picked up on those, Callum, whether rather than looking at by local authority, whether we should do it by region and the like. And another question by saying, many people are sort of snapping up bungalows, which means that there's an even bigger pressure for local populations where people are migrating, inward migration to those seaside areas. So did any of that sort of come through your research?
I think it's correct about snapping up bungalows. The bungalows seem to be in short supply. Certainly in Cambridgeshire, it's one of the main issues about people wanting to move from larger houses to smaller houses, but they really want a bungalow, and there just doesn't seem to be enough of them being built. I'm guessing it's because for developers they're not quite as profitable as a 5-bedroom townhouse in a new development. And I think there aren't large numbers of people moving via the Seaside and Country scheme, but certainly if it did become popular, then you would get that pressure on local housing. But it doesn't seem to have come out yet, despite the fact that people do often move into the same areas their friends have previously done, when they see that their move has been a success. But as yet, there's no sign from our research anyway that it's causing any undue pressure. We're looking at fairly small samples, so there may be other research that says something different.
I think Louise raises a really interesting question as well. Is there any data around cost of housing in relation to older people and what is or isn't affordable for these people? And she gives an example, somebody in category 1 might wish to move, but there may not be suitable housing options within their price range. Did any of you look at that in terms of the affordability and some of the sort of issues around rents and service charges around property types in either Manchester or Hackney?
So for us, the data around affordability is really patchy. Certainly things like Understanding Society ask questions about what people think the value of their property is and how much equity they have, but the quality of the data is really poor, and a lot of people are unable to answer that question. So, which is a real shame, because that'd be a really good piece of information for us all to know. So yeah, we've really struggled with that, but kind of broader kind of questions of, we asked a question in our survey about kind of how comfortable do you feel financially, and that's a really good predictor of the latent classes. So we know that there is a really strong affordability aspect to that group membership. And like I say, we've had a really good set of discussions with housing associations over the last few days. In terms of things like service charges, and in terms of kind of the cost of living crisis and the implication that has on all these different housing typologies, I think that's going to be, it's not something we really looked at in this project, but it's a huge area of interest. And if anyone's not doing work about cost of living and the implications in their organisations, it's probably a good time to start doing that.
Millie, any thoughts about affordability more generally, perhaps? Or is that something that you're interested in sort of pursuing as well?
Yeah, we are interested in pursuing it, and only recently the English Housing Survey data came out a few days ago.
Yep.
One of the biggest things of that was definitely the PRS costs and actually pensions at the moment. And even though the English Housing Survey is more about stock, there was some really terrible data to come out of that, just showing how at the rate we're going, it's completely unaffordable. We already know it, but it's good that nationally that's being recognised, and I think Aging Better will be kind of focusing on that more, that inequalities work as we move forward. But it's really good that actually, terribly, cost of living's brought to the forefront, but at least it's a conversation we're all having now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it'd be also interesting if you sort of build that in terms of climate change and sort of decarb agenda and introducing all that about how we make, absolutely, the big challenge about, what's the sustainability issue in terms of our future housing for aging, both in terms of our existing stock, but also the new stock that's coming through.
Yeah.
The final question, perhaps, it's going back. Martin raises an issue about proximity to family, and I'm going back to this sort of right placing and thinking about neighbourhoods. So I think both from coming out of the Hackney and the Greater Manchester work, is that a factor that you think is a high level of interest in this in terms of looking at families, relatives, and that I think Mark, you talked about connectedness with community in the local neighbours. And anything coming out of that?
This is I'm really glad you asked this question because it's a really exciting kind of one of the findings. No, and we were a bit shocked by that. Friends and the quality of friendships in a locality and the friends living in your local area is a really strong predictor of people's latent class and how they feel about their community. But family, much less so. I think there's a case particularly amongst kind of later classes 4 and 5, which perhaps more have more financial resource, perhaps more likely to have children who have moved away because they're more likely to go to university or to moving cities for jobs. But because you've got these other parts of your life which give you that kind of embeddedness and resilience, that's not a huge determining factor. Yeah, no, we were quite surprised about that, to be honest. But yeah, it's friends being local and the quality of those friendships, which are two really determining factors.
And I think, Callum, social connections, friendships and relationships came through in your presentation, but how about family?
Yeah.
Anything?
Family was spoken about a bit less. I think that probably we'd probably be in agreement with Mark there. They talked a lot about community in general rather than family, and a lot of the time it was the relationships that built up with neighbours, really, that was the big concern. Some people wanted to move closer to family or were concerned that their family had moved away from them and they wouldn't see, for example, grandchildren as much. But it was more about the community and the people around them, the neighbours, the neighbourhood, really, that came through quite a lot more strongly than family, I think.
Well, look, I know we've slightly overrun, but I think the richness of the conversation has been very beneficial. I've certainly learned a lot from all three of you this afternoon. On behalf of the HousingLIN, can I thank each of you for your presentations, really fascinating. Can I thank the team behind the scenes for organising and putting on a seamless survey. I do apologise that my Wi-Fi went down halfway through, but I hope that didn't alarm you or sort of put you off. If this is your first time that you've joined our happy hour, we run these weekly or bi-weekly. In fact, our last one of our summer series is on the 26th of July, where we'll be looking at issues relating to inclusive design and more around interior design as well. We're very much hoping to launch a fact sheet on looking at interior design, and you'll be hear from interior designer as well as Motion Spot and a couple of others in terms of thinking about the qualitative aspects of housing and the innovations going on in relation to the design and interior design of housing in later life. So on behalf of the HousingLIN, can I wish you a very a happy evening, a warm evening. Where I live, it's just started raining, so I'm sure I'm going to get a bit wet on the way back up into my office, from my office into home. And I look very much forward to seeing you at the next happy hour. Thanks ever so much for all your presentations, and keep in touch with the LIN. Cheers.
Bye.